We haven't covered an individual god in a while, so today we're going to be going over Cupid, his lore, backstory, and all of that good stuff. So, he was the son of Venus and Mars, who were more or less of the Ares, but just from Roman mythology, and he came armed with a bow and a quiver, whose arrows had a very particular effect surrounding love. Now, his main story involves Aphrodite, and when the third daughter of a king is born, she grows up to be so beautiful that words fail to describe her beauty itself. Eventually, Venus hears of this princess and she's very upset that she even exists. So she dispatches Cupid to, well, handle her. And Cupid's job was to make it so that a monster would fall in love with her at some point, or she could only have a relationship with a monster. Now, Psyche herself didn't have any real friends and was very lonely. The men wouldn't have any sort of relationships with her because either A, they were afraid of Aphrodite's wrath or the wrath of the gods, or B, Aphrodite had a hand in manipulating them or using her powers to affect them in such a way that they just would not have any relationships with Psyche. So she was lonely on the boyfriend front. All this whilst her sisters were getting married and living happy lives. And it wasn't that she wasn't happy for her sisters, but that just made her even more lonely. Those were even less people to talk to her, to have as company. But when Cupid arrives from the heavens and gazes upon Psyche, he's taken aback a bit by her beauty and then accidentally nips himself with one of his special arrows. From this point on, he had to have Psyche. Psyche eventually was just fed up with the fact that she wasn't getting much of any attention, and so she seeks some advice from the oracles, who feed her a line that goes something like this. Her future husband awaits her on top of the mountain. There's also an added part about the husband being a person who the men or gods want to really mess with all that much. But either way, Psyche accepts this and tries to seek out this husband, and she's aided by Zephyr, the west wind, who carries her off to a peaceful valley. It's a stunning home. The halls are golden. Healthy trees surround it, and there's a crystalline fountain at its core. She assumes that her husband lives here, and that he may even be divine. She hears her husband's voice through the halls, and has a relationship with him similar to the relationship between Zeus and Semele. Progresses the same way that relationship did, with Psyche having doubts about her husband, won't really return. That Cupid indeed wasn't really much of a monster, and having all of her fears about him sort of removed, she seeks him out and eventually comes across the goddess of grain, Ceres, who Ceres advises Psyche to sort of try to appease Venus and is given 3 tasks. Not necessarily solely by Venus, but Venus asked her to complete 3 tasks. The first task was to separate different grains within Venus's storehouse. Thing is, here there was plenty of grain, and it was a fairly formidable task, obviously. She was to steal golden wool from a herd of sheep, and she was to travel into the underworld and steal some of the beauty, or collect some of the beauty, of Queen Proserpina, and then pass that on to Venus. This beauty would be contained within a box, and she wasn't allowed to open this box. If she did open the box, there would be quite severe punishments. Now, Cupid helps Psyche along the way. He instructs his helpers to tell Psyche how exactly she's supposed to sort out this grain. He gives her some advice on how to steal some fleece from the sheep, and even advised Psyche on how best to avoid the dangers of Hades. She was instructed to take a coin for the toll that she would eventually have to pay, bring some bread for Cerberus so that she wouldn't have any problems with him. Specifically, this was made very clear she was not to eat any food whilst in the underworld, because that was more or less how Persephone was kept trapped in the underworld. She ate pomegranates, and then was more or less forced to stay in the underworld for a bit. You have to understand that Psyche was very excited when she got all of this advice, especially about entering the underworld, because when she heard that she even had to enter the underworld, she became quite depressed, because she knew that no living mortal could enter the underworld. That was only something that the dead could do. So she figured that Venus had tricked her or played a horrible scheme, or, she wasn't particularly pleased. Now, Venus already foretold Psyche's downfall, and the actual details of this varies depending on which myth you're reading. Either a herd of Stygian sheep bring her demise, or a golden arrow pierces her chest. But either way, this is thanks to the fact that she opens the box, and she wasn't supposed to do that. So Cupid who's watching this whole thing can tolerate his mother's meddling no longer. And either he awakens his sleeping lover from her sleep, or takes her body up into the heavens and pleads with Jupiter to remove the curse that has been placed on her because, she opened the box. After Jupiter revives her or heals her wounds, the two can remain together and live in the heavens, and as an added bonus, Psyche gets to be an immortal and marries Cupid. Now, the moral of the story is that love always prevails, and it's supposed to showcase the power of love. Fun fact, their daughter's name actually means pleasure. Some extra trivia things about Cupid here. When he was a kid, he wanted some honey, and as a small child, he was stung by a bee, and his tears were sort of soothed away by Aphrodite, his mother. Now, apparently, he actually had two types of arrows. A lead-tipped arrow used to end affections, and a sharper, more pointy arrow used to actually attract people, or at least a specific person to another person. And in one myth, he actually tests this out on Apollo. See, Apollo was mocking Cupid for one reason or another, and Cupid was just sick of it. So Cupid shot Daphne with a lead arrow, and this made it so that the next person that she would see, she would just be repulsed by and wouldn't want a thing to do with romantically. Then he shot Apollo with the sharper arrow. This made it so that Apollo, the next person he saw, he would desire endlessly romantically and would want everything to do with them. And a really nice thing about the fact that Cupid did this was apparently Cupid shot these arrows from all the way atop a mountain. So yeah, props to Cupid being that good of a shot. It's really nice that he actually turned out to be a hunter in the game. Then again, I suppose when it comes to myths, if you've got a bow and arrow when it comes to Smite and myths, you're probably going to be a hunter. Even if those weapons might not even have necessarily been considered your weapons as far as the original texts are concerned, doesn't matter. You're probably going to be a hunter. Daphne was actually a nymph and the daughter of a river god, and the river god is eventually convinced to transform his daughter into a laurel tree. Now, Apollo didn't give up even though she was a laurel tree, and turned her leaves into an evergreen color. He also went so far as to make clothes out of her laurels. But I suppose Daphne being a tree, there would be no sort of real romantic attachments, at least not in a conventional sense. Though Apollo was a god, and you'd think that if he really, really wanted to make it happen, I'm sure he could. But with a tree, is there a term for that? Is it doing those sorts of things with a tree? I mean, there's one for doing it with the dead, one for doing it with... Okay, I'm not going to divine all the different things that you... Anyways, Cupid is also a symbol of Valentine's Day, or the god represents Valentine's Day, a day to celebrate one's love for someone else. And I suppose this video probably would have been more appropriate around that time of year, but I kind of wanted to do it now, and now. When you think about it, Cupid actually has a really strong and potentially devastating power. The ability to make anyone, regardless of whoever they are in the world, force them to fall in love with someone else, regardless of who they may be in the world. You could have old people fall in love with children, or vice versa. You could have siblings, parents, family members do that sort of thing, and just thinking about all of the possibilities, Cupid really, really is incredibly powerful. I suppose his Greek counterpart Eros is a primordial god for a reason. Also, by the way, Hira's their depiction of Cupid, him being a small child, is pretty wrong for the fact that, well, he wasn't. I mean, think about the story I told you about Psyche. If Cupid really was a small child god, the things that happen in that story, could they really feasibly happen? Would Aphrodite really be okay with her infant child doing what he was doing with Psyche, even though the child is divine? Still, I mean, would you be okay reading that sort of thing? Listening to that sort of... No, Cupid is not a kid, just so that... Yeah, I probably should have explained that before I started talking about the Psyche story, but I didn't. Let's end the video there before I make this video not PG. If you enjoyed the video, learned something new, go ahead and leave a like, as it really does actually help me out. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to watch more content like this. But until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.